Why set your alarm early? You know you won't get up. You'll never get that job. Don't even bother applying. I can't believe you said that. You're so stupid. Hey, if any of those sound familiar, that's your inner critic talking. Look, self-criticism, constructive self-criticism is fine, even useful, but when you're too hard on yourself, it's really demoralizing. I want to show you how to step up, take control of your mind, become the CEO of your mind, and demote your inner critic. Hi, it's Michael. So I want to talk about the inner critic. You've probably heard this term before, but I really want to define it. So the inner critic is a personification of the language that we use to criticize ourselves, especially when we really beat up on ourselves and overly criticize ourselves. We can think about that type of language personified in an inner critic. So for example, this morning, which was actually the inspiration for this video, I spilled some coffee. And I rarely do that, and just so that we're clear, I rarely do that, but I had this feeling of just really, I was very angry at myself. I kind of ruminated on it, and it got me thinking, like, what is the purpose of being so hard on myself? Spilling a cup of coffee is not a big deal. Nobody died, everything was fine, yet I was really hard on myself, and I got to thinking, well, this isn't really helpful for me. And in fact, it really put me in a bad mood. So I wanted to talk about the inner critic. If you find yourself using harsh language against yourself after you say make a mistake or something like that, you really need to stop doing that. Now look, it's okay to learn from your mistakes, to want to grow, to want to get better. That's perfectly fine. And after you say make a mistake, sure, you can get a little mad for a second. That's normal, but really please don't ruminate on it, and please don't be really hard on yourself. It's not good for you. It really hurts you. Instead, use a mistake as an opportunity to learn, maybe do some journaling, and be really reflective, but not abusive. Okay, so the inner critic, again, is this personification of the language that we use with ourselves. So it's a form of self-talk, but it's the kind of self-talk that's really abusive, that's overly critical, almost as if, say, a coach, like a really critical coach or a really severe, strict teacher was talking to you. That's sometimes the way the inner critic treats you as a person. So I'd like you to relax a little bit when you make mistakes, really be aware of the language that you use, and be a little kinder to yourself. So that's what the inner critic is. So I had this metaphor about the inner critic, and I thought about it this way. Think of the inner critic as, say, a member of a board of directors. And with any good board of directors at a company, there's a good diversity of opinions. Someone might be really good at pointing out flaws, errors, etc. Somebody like the inner critic. That is someone you want. That's a good role to have. However, if that person has too much of a voice, speaks up all the time, and is very negative, it's pretty demoralizing for the company. You want to have a diverse range of opinions on that board of directors. You want to have maybe self-confidence on that board. You might want to have empathy on that board. So I thought about the idea of you as the CEO of your mind, you as the CEO of your thoughts, so that you become actually the observer of your thoughts. So in the example I used about spilling coffee, I was able to actually catch the language I was using on myself. And I remember saying to myself, you should be more careful. God, that was stupid. Things like that. And it got me thinking, like, those aren't really things that I believe about myself. Can I notice this language that's being generated from my brain? And it's not really me, it's just language that pops up from habit, maybe from conditioning when I was a kid, how I was brought up, etc. It's not really me. I really don't believe those things. So I'd like to propose that you treat the thoughts, the things that come up, as members of a board of directors, and you're like the CEO or the observer. And when these thoughts, negativity is pretty easy to spot. When it pops up, just don't judge it. Don't be angry at yourself. Just notice the phenomenon of, say, the inner critic coming up and being negative, kind of beating yourself up. And what you are is the observer of that. You don't buy into it. You don't believe it. You're like the CEO that is kind of considering all the opinions at the board of directors. You don't actually act on what's suggested until you realize, like, that's a good idea, or no, that's a bad idea. So I'd like to propose that you try an exercise, which I'm going to take you through, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Okay, so let's try a visualization. I think this is going to help you. It helped me, helps a lot of people to visualize, to think about a way to create a metaphor where you can have more control over your thoughts, over your inner critic. And here's the way it works. So get in like a comfortable spot without distractions, and set a timer maybe on your phone for, say, 5 to 10 minutes. And you can do this on your own if you like, again, later. And the way it works is, while you're sitting there relaxed, your timer's taking care of everything else. Don't worry about that. And you should have enough time. 5 or 10 minutes is about the right amount of time. Think about this. Think about you as a CEO sitting in a nice, fancy corporate boardroom, a big table, and you're in charge. And you walk into the room and you sit down, and seated around the table is the board of directors of your company, if you will. And you notice these different sort of personifications of the way you use language with yourself. Sometimes you're self-critical, sometimes you're self-confident, sometimes you have a lot of empathy for yourself. So picture, if you will, all of these characters sitting around the boardroom table. Picture what they look like, how they're dressed, and just observe them. They're all sitting around this table. But remember, you're in charge. You get to make the ultimate decisions. You're the CEO. So let's create a scenario that makes the inner critic really chime in, really speak up. And let's say that you, as the CEO, have a cup of coffee and you spill your coffee. And it goes on all over the papers, maybe gets on the floor, kind of makes a mess. And this really makes the inner critic, really bothers him, and he stands up and he shouts and he says, "I can't believe you're so clumsy. How could you spill coffee at this meeting? That's so unprofessional. You should really be more careful." And all the other voices, all the personifications look at the inner critic, then they all look at you, because remember, you're the leader, you're in charge, so you've got to say something. So as a good CEO, you don't chastise the inner critic on the spot, because you realize the inner critic is important. It's important to have a critical mind to learn from, not to berate you, but to point out errors. Okay, so that's actually a good thing. And so you want to have some empathy for the inner critic. After all, maybe the inner critic learned this sort of harsh tone maybe from a bad coach or a teacher or a parent or society or whatever. So you want to cut him some slack. But what you really want to do as a good leader is you want to set the tone for the board. You don't want that negativity to sort of permeate the board of directors. So what you do is you just take a breath, right? And you cultivate some empathy for a second. And you notice and observe the harshness, the tone, the sort of abusive language. And then you set the tone straight. You say to the inner critic in a kind way, you say, "I really appreciate your opinion. However, I just really need to say that I'm not clumsy. And spilling coffee is kind of normal sometimes. Like it's really not that big of a deal. Doesn't happen often, and if it does, it's not a big deal. And probably everyone's done it at some point. So again, thanks for speaking up, but let's move on. Okay, so at that point, picture the inner critic sitting down, maybe looking a little defeated, and don't gloat, right? Don't think that you've won or something like that. You want to be really professional and set the tone for the rest of the board. So again, you have empathy for this critic. And just sit there and notice how you change the tone of the whole boardroom meeting. You were professional, you were rational, you didn't try to vindicate yourself. You just simply observed and you slowed things down and you were calm and rational. And now we're back to a good ambiance in the boardroom, okay? So if you want to use that metaphor, that visualization, at times it might be a little goofy, but it's interesting to personify things and use metaphors. It can be really helpful to problem solve just the way we talk to ourselves, the quirkiness of being human. We use language to talk to ourselves. It's really curious. So if you can empower yourself to rise above that and just observe sort of the linguistic phenomenon going on in your mind, it can be really empowering. So that's the visualization. If you want to try it, it might work for you. I really enjoyed speaking with you today about the inner critic. It's something that I've struggled with for quite a long time. I've just only recently got a little dominion over it, and it's really helping me. It's making me happy to be this observer, to be the CEO of my mind. So I encourage you to do the same. Thanks all for watching. Please treat yourselves well, treat others well, and take care. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to subscribe and also share with family and friends. Hope you find these mindset tips helpful in your life.